When I read The Troop by Nick Cutter, that was the first book I've ever read that I actually thought to myself, I wish I had a channel on YouTube so that I could talk about this. If you are a fan of schlocky Stephen King, so something like The Mangler, you will probably love The Troop. It is absolutely in line with that. It's kind of got that 70s, 80s schlocky horror vibe. So here's what I liked about The Troop. The writing is pretty snappy. Descriptions of things are clear. I can understand and visualize what's happening for the most part. And I actually really like the concept. The concept of this is that there is a genetically engineered parasite, specifically a type of tapeworm, that infects a host and causes the host to go into an overdrive of eating, and also the parasite itself takes so many nutrients that the person in question loses a ton of weight, or the organism in question, I guess I should say, loses a ton of weight in a very, very short amount of time, becomes skeletal, except for their belly, which will remain distended because they keep eating everything they can get their hands on. Literally anything. Metal, sand, dirt, wood, food if they can find it, the bag the food was in. They just are insatiably hungry because of this parasite. It ultimately kills them through presumably starvation and nutrient deprivation. This thing is implied to be in your breath, in your blood, in everything. Like, it's just coating you inside. And so if there's a cut or if somebody bursts because it came out or what have you, there's just a spray of this stuff and you're infected. The tapeworm ultimately will burst out of you, kind of like the alien from Alien, but it will burst out of your stomach instead of up in your chest. Sorry, I'm giggling because it's so silly. What that means is that if everyone isn't infected by the end of the book, then it doesn't make any sense, because that's how microscopic infections work. It's very, very easy for everyone to get infected, and yet we do have one survivor. When I realized how quickly this thing spread, I actually thought, oh no, maybe there isn't a survivor. Maybe everybody dies, which, you know, that's different. That's not what happens. I liked the humor. There is humor in this. I mean, I think that the things that I found funny a lot of times were supposed to be funny. Like, I don't think any of that was not intentionally funny. It just wasn't enough to make me like the book. What I didn't like about this book are the characters and the pacing. I didn't like any of the characters. There was one that I thought was fine. The nerd who Scoutmaster Tim is like negging in his own head. It's very, very funny to me. Scoutmaster Tim makes just hands down some of the worst decisions I've seen an adult human make in any horror movie, just across the board, full stop. He and this scout troop of young boys are staying alone on an island where there's a single cabin for shelter, and basically roughing it to a degree at this cabin. There's a big storm coming. They are isolated. Part of that is also the military is actively isolating them and cutting off contact very intentionally, which is a plot point in the book. This guy shows up. He rowed over in his boat and he just showed up. Now, Scoutmaster Tim does not have a boat. He actually was dropped off along with the boys by one of the local, I think, fishermen, if I'm not mistaken. They were not supposed to be picked up that day. They were supposed to be picked up at the earliest the next day, possibly the day after. I don't remember those kinds of details, but they were going to be there for at least one night. And this guy shows up, this total stranger who is clearly unwell, both physically and mentally. And Scoutmaster Tim has several children in his care. Rather than separate all of the children from this grown adult man who is clearly ill. Scoutmaster Tim is a medical doctor. Scoutmaster Tim sees this man who has a distended belly and is eating literally everything in sight, and thinks, let me bring this person inside of this cabin because we can help him. And he does a little effort to separate the boys from the man, but then he explicitly has one of the boys come in and help him do a medical diagnosis on this man. A little kid. Scoutmaster Tim is also not very charitable in his thought processes toward one of the boys in particular. This boy is characterized as just a nerd, just a straight up nerd. Like he's just a nerd. He's a dorky kid. And Scoutmaster Tim has nothing but judgment for this child. The descriptions of some of the more horrific elements weren't particularly scary to me. They honestly weren't even really gross to me for the most part. One major issue that I have with the pace, though, is that we'll set up a scene and then there will be like a news report that tells you what happens at the end. All that we know is that by the end of the book, only one of the boys survives this situation. So we already know that the adult is not going to survive, that most of the kids are not going to survive. And that kind of ruined any suspense for me. This book takes a lot from Carrie. It actually takes kind of the structure from Carrie. And Nick Hutter has said that. That's not a secret. That's something that he's very open about. Stephen King obviously didn't mind. So cool, awesome. It also takes a lot from It. Like a lot. The character who's coded as the psychopath is very much so a character named Patrick. I believe it's Patrick in It, who sucks and is coded as a sociopath. But I actually found him very scary in It. His sections are some of the most harrowing in that book in terms of descriptions. You find out that this kid has done some really terrible stuff, and the way that Stephen King describes his mental process really, really got to me. In The Troop, the character in question, his thought process isn't scary to me. He's just being cruel. Scoutmaster Tim gets infected first and starts showing signs first, and Baby Psychopath convinces everyone else to lock Scoutmaster Tim in a closet immediately, like no hesitation. And these kids are supposed to like Scoutmaster Tim. This is supposed to be the adult in the situation. And this kid convinces them all immediately, let's lock him in a closet so that he can't hurt us. It's very funny. Like, it's so funny to me. I mentioned this before. The whole story is interspersed with news articles and medical reports and trial documentation and other things like that. I kind of wish that had been the whole story instead of having an actual story interspersed with that. It really cut into the pacing. It cut into any tension. There was no tension the entire book for me. I had no interest in any of these people surviving. I didn't find the concept that shocking in terms of what's actually happening. The book also, for me, really struggled with morality. And I do think it intended to do an exploration of morality, but there's effectively no adult left pretty quickly into the book. There's one baby psychopath who is doing weird psychopath things, and essentially his way of being a weird psychopath is convincing other people to do things to themselves. Once people are infected with what's going on in the book, they start acting more animalistic. The question of human versus animal is never truly explored. So going back to the baby psychopath, I believe the character's name from It is Patrick Klepper. I'm gonna just call him Patrick. In It, Patrick Klepper's arc is essentially he does terrible things because he's a psychopath. He gets his comeuppance. And the way that he gets his comeuppance is ironic and related to the only thing that he's actually scared of. In this book, the baby psychopath kind of goes through a similar thing. His comeuppance is directly tied to the horror in the book. Something happens to him that is, in fact, him being victimized by the thing that is victimizing everyone else. But I didn't care. He gets infected. He knows that he's been infected, but we don't actually see the process of his infection. We don't see this cathartic moment of this baby psychopath who has done terrible things by this point in the book actually getting poetic justice for what he's done, like becoming scared at any point, realizing that he is indeed succumbing to this thing. He gets infected and then the next time we see him, he's fully gone. And I guess I'm supposed to be scared. That's honestly kind of my theme for this whole book. There's no moment where you are watching this kid who thought he was likened to a god. He basically makes himself in his own head the god of this little island, who's playing with the other people like they're little ants. You never see that moment where this child realizes that he is in fact still just a bag of meat and is being victimized the same way everyone else has been victimized. You never get that. He just transitions to what they become off screen, and the next time you see him, he's just a weird monster beast. So I want to talk about, I think, the most famous scene in the book, or at least the one that people tend to reference when they talk about this book, which is a turtle that is found by two of the boys and tortured to death. They do not torture it to death intentionally. These two boys have found a source of meat, and they are aware that they may not be able to get food for several days because of other things that are happening during the story. So they decide to kill it for the meat, but they can't commit to it because these are not boys who grew up hunting. These are not boys who have been desensitized to being able to kill an animal. And so they actually muck it up. They literally end up torturing this turtle to death. When it finally does die, they feel so bad about it that they bury the body and end up not using the meat. I found this to be the most humanizing moment of the entire book. I thought it was really well done. I thought it was a really nice reflection on humanity and preparedness in a survival situation, and could you actually do the things that you need to do in order to survive, but also having the consequences of your actions looking right up at you and knowing that not only did you mess this up, but you caused this creature suffering, and ultimately it was to no end. You did not actually use the meat that you just created by killing this creature. I thought that was a really, really well done scene. I didn't find it scary. I found it sad. I thought it was really sad. Like these two little boys who, again, these are all little boys except for Scoutmaster Tim. These two little boys tried to help themselves by murdering a turtle, and because they couldn't commit to the actual murder, they ended up torturing it to death, and then they felt so bad about having tortured it to death that they ended up burying it and not using the meat. I just thought that was really well done, a nice expression of kind of that idea of not being able to face the consequences of your actions, knowing that you've just really caused pain and there was no reward at the end. You didn't get a delicious turtle soup. You just had the dead body of this now mutilated turtle that you really messed up, and you feel really bad about it. And so you bury it like you would bury any other problem if you could, and you walk away and never talk about it again. Another moment that I really liked, mostly because it made me laugh, is there's a scene where the main evil scientist is doing a hilariously evil experiment with an ape of some kind. I can't remember if it was an orangutan or something else. He takes a break in the middle and his colleague comes in and starts taking notes, and the colleague's notes are very dramatic and like, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. Oh Jesus, oh no. And then it transitions back to the evil scientist notes and it's back to being very clinical. Very good joke. Excellent gag. I laughed out loud. I just thought that was the funniest thing. I thought that was very, very well done. Ultimately, at the end of the book, everyone except one person died. There's an implication that this thing was intentionally released to this specific island as a test. That's kind of where the book ends, if I remember correctly. The conclusion of the book was not particularly satisfying for me personally, but that's not to say it won't be for somebody else. I just am not a person who was satisfied by it. That being said, you may love this book, and honestly, I hope you do. I'd love to hear from others who loved this book. I'd love to hear your thoughts on The Troop by Nick Cutter. Go get him. That's all it took. I hope if you have read it, then you loved it. If you haven't read it, again, if you like Stephen King style schlock like The Mangler or, 70s or 80s silly kind of splatterpunky type stuff, I think you'd probably really enjoy this book. So give it a shot. Thanks for watching. See you later.